Okay, in the last video, we went through and we were doing a comparison between just instead of taking and aggregating your data and then doing a pivot table on your data, just go back to the original data and do a pivot table on your original data. And we saw a couple of different ways of doing that, or really just one way. And I showed what's the difference between if you have margins equals true versus margins equals false. All right. So at the end of that video, I put up a caution flag. So these particular instances, I was calculating the mean. Well, what does that mean? What does the average mean? We're calculating averages. Are these averages based on how are these averages calculated? Right? So if we came up and said, okay, well, if I'm looking at, I'll bring up pivot 3, which doesn't have the, all right? So when I look at averages of store 1 and brand 58, right? So this is the mean sales. What does that mean? What does that relate to? Right? So is this the average of sales for brand 58 in store 1 for the year? Or is this the average that's conditional on making a sale? Because it's possible that brand 58 on a certain day has 0 sales. And it won't show up in the data. It's not going to show up brand 58 0 sales. It's just going to there's not going to be an entry for brand 58 on that day. So when I calculate these averages, I have to make sure I'm interpreting the averages correctly. Because if somebody asks you, well, is this average daily sales $15 a day for this brand? Yes. Assuming that you make a sale every day. If you don't make a sale every day, this is not average daily sales. Right? So if we could determine the number of days that brand 58 was actually sold, then we would be able to say, okay, well, now we might have a better idea, or we may have a better way of calculating what is my average daily sales. All right, so the caution here is, how are things calculated, right? So how are these averages calculated? So is it the number of days in total, or just the number of days that brand 58 was sold in store number 1? All right. So to test this, I created a 4th pivot table. Let's try it. So to test this, I created pivot 4 with the sum of all sales, right? That's what I did. So if the average in pivot and these previous pivot tables we've created, pivot 2, pivot 3, if the average in pivot 2 and pivot 3 are based on every day, then 365 times the average should get me the total sales found in pivot 4. Okay, so this is what I'm testing. If the average in pivot 2, and pivot 3 are based on every day, then 365 days times the average should get me the total sales found in pivot 4. All right, so this is just a test, right? This is all we're trying to do. We're just trying to get an idea. So let's create pivot 4. All right, we'll go back to the original data. So it's df pivot table, and we want the index equal brand. We want the columns to equal store. We want the values. I'm going to put this on a separate line. We want the values to equal sales dollar. We want the ag function to equal sum. We want margins equal false. And we want fill value to equal nothing. Okay? Now, I could also just do a count, find out what's the count of each one, right? So I could say, how many times did I have sales dollars versus the sum? So I could change this. I think I can change this to count. How many days did I have sales dollars in this table? Or I could do the sum and then figure out whether or not the averages make sense. All right, but we'll just keep it at sum for the time being. Or maybe what I'd like to do is maybe it's possible. Let's try it. Let's do sum and count. Oh, put that in the wrong place. And let's see if it'll do both. I don't know, it's giving me a invalid syntax here. I don't think it's liking what I'm trying to do here. You may only be able to do one ag function, but I'm going to try it. It may only like the one ag function. Let's give it a try. Nope, not liking it. All right, well, let's just go with the sum. Unless it's around parentheses. Let's see if it likes that syntax. Nope, still doesn't like that. All right, we're gonna just do sum. Okay, that should like that. Oh, maybe I got something else wrong. Okay, let's see what else I got wrong. Ag function equals sum. Got it. Margins equals false. Values equals sales dollars. DF pivot table index. Oh, this is why. Okay, now I'm going to go back and try this. Sum and count. Let's see. Oh, I see. The error was not because of that. It was because I had the 4 separated. So I'm going to try it. Let's give it a try, shall we? Let's run that sum. No, didn't like that. Margins, I think I've got that spelled right. Oh, small m, right? Right? It's just, that's what it was, right? Margins. That's not right. Let's try it again. Ooh, it's working. I like that. That's fun. All right, so let's look at pivot 4. What do we got pivot 4? Oh, 156. Well, that would make sense because I probably have something for sum and count. So let's take a look at pivot 4. Right? So I've got all the sums. Unfortunately, sums and the counts are going to be separated. So the sum is for number 1, store 1, brand, $1,216. Let's take a look at what the count is for table 1. For store 1. Getting there. Okay, now we got the count. 81 days. All right? So that average that we saw before from, let's see, I think it was right here. This average of brand 1 or brand 58 for that $15, that's only for 81 days where I sold brand 58. So the interpretation of $15 has to be very clear because it's not based on the entire year, right? You're looking at some of this stuff, some of these brands, 5 days, 123 days, 24 days, 68 days, 82 days, right? Here's one that sells 213 days, whatever that brand is, right? So you have to be careful with your interpretation. So if I took a look, go back to my sum of sales, right? I take this and I calculate what's the average sales per day for the entire year. I'll take my 1216.99 divided by 365. I get $3.33 on average per day for that particular brand. So when you use the function mean, it's using based on the available data that's there, and this data set doesn't have zeros for days where I didn't sell something. All right. So just kind of the recap, just to make some notes on this. Our results point out the faults of just calculating a mean and assuming the calculation is the average sales per day. In this particular case, it is actually the average sales per day conditioned on selling that brand on that day. So as we pointed out when I did the little calculation, the actual average sales per day over 365 days for brand 58 in store 1 was $3.33 per day. Okay? That is a completely different interpretation versus $15 per day. So this comes down to knowing, I calculated the means. Well, what does that mean? I calculated, I did counts. You got to understand what's in your data and what these calculations mean, because ultimately that's got to get communicated to the decision maker.